Hey everybody. Just give me 1 second here. Still getting used to everything. Not really a professional streamer at the moment. No. That's the one I want. Welcome. Thank you for anybody joining and anybody who follows up and perhaps watches this video at a later date. I guess I should introduce the channel. So the Pixospritz channel is going to be focused. Oh, sorry. Let me actually turn down that background music a bit. Okay. So yeah. Let's start that again. Thank you for tuning in and joining us on the Pixospritz channel. The Pixospritz channel is going to be focused on a number of different areas, all focused around the Pixospritz game engine that I'm developing. This particular series is a devlog, and this is the first episode of the devlog. And will be pretty much the starting point for this channel. I imagine that the first few episodes of the devlog are going to be the primary content on this channel for the foreseeable future. And then as the devlog comes to a close and we start to actually see somewhat of a finished product outside of it, then there will be some additional content focused around the Pixospritz game engine. So once it's actually developed, there will probably be a bunch of other series, such as how-tos, tutorials, overviews, as well as some content generated using Pixospritz itself, whether that be small little shorts, cutscenes, demos, etc. But for now, we're pretty far away from that goal. So the initial few devlogs are going to be just kind of getting us up to speed of what's been done so far, what the general idea of Pixospritz is, where some of the inspiration for it came from, what I'm, I guess, trying to achieve. Because on top of just building this game engine, I'm trying to also develop a simple game using it. Now, I have a number of ideas for different games that I might pursue ultimately, but the first game that I'm building is going to be very much a strategy RPG of sorts. Not a real-time strategy, more like a turn-based tactical RPG. And it's going to be heavily inspired by games like Final Fantasy Tactics, Suikoden Tactics, which I actually have in front of me here, as well as games like Makai Kingdom, Disgaea, Phantom Brave, and a number of other titles by companies like Atlas. Not necessarily developed by them, but published by them. But that's kind of the focus that I'm going to be targeting for the first game built with this. So with that in mind, most of the functionality that I'm focused on developing for my engine is to allow that kind of game to be developed. I do have some ideas in mind that can perhaps expand the engine into a few other areas, such as platforming, perhaps some sort of action RPG, and less of a turn-based one. And then also additionally, perhaps just various other kinds of games. The other thing, though, that I kind of envision for this platform is almost like animated novels. So if anyone's ever used a digital novel or has read one or created one themselves, then they kind of know what I'm talking about. For those of you who aren't familiar with what a digital novel is, essentially a digital novel is a novel that is very interactive and played out almost kind of like a presentation or a movie in some ways. So one of the ideas that I kind of have is that I want to make it so that you can release episodic content that can be played using my engine essentially as they get released. So as each new episode comes out, you can follow along with the story and maybe interact, because perhaps they're small miniature games, one chapter at a time. Or additionally, perhaps they're just interactive movies that you kind of just follow along, reading, listening to, say, somebody voice act, or and watching the sprites act out on the scene. The idea here is just to kind of make it easy to have digital media, whether it be a game or a cutscene or something in between, even like a full-on movie, I guess, so to speak. I guess pixelated. But that's kind of the goal. And so when I say that I'm building an engine, I should really clarify that what I'm actually trying to build is a virtual game system that has the engine kind of pre-compiled into it, so that all the core elements of the engine itself, regarding the graphics, the sound, anything to do with actually displaying, say, even the gamepad and the controls and the inputs, is all kind of baked in to the virtual console. The virtual console then can be used to play different games. So rather than you, say, compiling the game with the engine, much like you would with most game engines, instead what you're doing is you're developing a game package that can be run on the Pixospritz virtual console. And so it removes a lot of the boilerplate. It removes a lot of the I guess hardware-specific stuff, platform-specific, I guess is a better word. And instead, it kind of just leaves the game content itself. Now, in order to do that, obviously, there are some opinionated ways of doing things, and I've sort of built up a structure. It's a very loose structure, but it's a structure nonetheless. There's a central manifest file that kind of acts as an index, and it is then interpreted, and the core scenes and assets are loaded up based on that manifest. And then from there, the game kind of plays out. So if there's additional zones, different games, different levels or whatever, then those would be loaded as the player kind of gets to it, or through some other trigger, whether it's a menu or some kind of script that the creator of the game package has added. So there is scripting. You do have the ability to script a lot of stuff. It's just that it's very declarative in most of the configurations, allowing you to kind of get started really quickly. And the other thing that it allows you to do is, because you don't have any of the actual hard-coded code and everything is kind of standalone scripts and files that's read in by the virtual console, while you don't get the most performance out of it, I will admit that. I'm looking at ways to perhaps improve performance at a later date. But we're also not building games that require extreme performance. I mean, the games that I'm basing my stuff on are very simple. Even at the time they were released, they were typically seen as kind of not too intensive, very retro-inspired graphics, not too many polygons on the screen at any given time. So even if it's not the most performant system, it should be performant enough for the purposes that I'm going for, which is why I've kind of decided to do this. In general, I think having that kind of medium, while it has its shortcomings, also comes with a number of strengths. One of them being that episodic content, that rather than having to have full games created, you can just release little bits of content at a time, or even just mini offshoot content for the fans. For example, if you have a main game that is quite large and is fully developed, maybe you do spin-off mini games that are like, much like DLC content is, perhaps only a few hours long. That's pretty much the length of the games that I'm envisioning for my platform. 2 to 3 hours to play a small story, the short story format of gaming, if you will. I also have other ideas, but not really applicable at this time, and they're not super pertinent to this particular podcast, especially not introducing it. But to get started, let's kind of take a look here for a moment. I'm just going to see if I can bring my screen up and if it's actually going to work. I had some technical issues earlier, so we shall see if I can get this to function. Let's see. We good? Yeah, we're good. Okay, sweet. Okay, so this is a devlog after all, so might as well start with some code. I'm sorry I've got a bunch of files open here. It's not the cleanest, but I guess I'll just sort of introduce everything. So on the left, this is the basic module structure. So I've separated out the core virtual console into the Pixos library here, and I have an example game package using the library here. And so, for example, that's where I might have, in this case, a variety of different audio assets for background music. I've got some different scripts, and I should mention at this time, since we've got it open here, I chose originally to just use JavaScript as my scripting language because it was quite simple. I should actually mention that the version of Pixospritz that I'm working on is written entirely in JavaScript with a bit of TypeScript and stuff where applicable. But it's not written in, say, C or C++, C# or Rust or anything like that. Like I said, it's not a super performant engine at the moment. But one of the reasons I wanted to do it with JavaScript is it would allow me to bake it into like a React component, make it easy for people to just plug into their existing React projects, and essentially add an embedded player to their website, web project, etc. So I wanted to make it really easy. Also having it available, I can just host it on like my phone. I can host it on a browser. Anything that can run WebGL is going to be able to play my games. So that was one of the core focuses. I also wanted to see what it was like to build a web-based game engine. What was WebGL like? What were its capabilities? When I originally started, I was originally using WebGL version 1. And then after a while, I decided to swap over to version 2 because it had slightly better performance. It had a couple of features that I wanted. And future forward, I was seeing it as it gained greater and greater adoption as I was building it. As new features get developed, they're going to get added to version 2. And so I'm going to be able to, say, possibly incorporate a lot more and I'm not going to have to go back and rewire everything or potentially break something. And, moving forward, tech debt should be less. So that was a lot of my reasoning behind going this route. But one of the things I didn't like was when I originally built the scripting engine, it was using JavaScript as well. And while that made it easy to reason and rationalize with, and essentially gave me access to the full API, both internal and I guess exposed public API, it was the fact that I had access to the global scope. I wasn't very happy with that. And I didn't like the fact that I had to have this sort of implicit function wrapper, because it just seemed to me to be, to be a problem. It seemed like it would lead to some headaches in the future. And so in order to counter that, I spent some time recently shifting all the scripting language away from JavaScript and instead focused on incorporating a Lua interpreter into my engine, because it was just safer. Just safer. It gave me more control over the scope, gave me more control over what could be run, but it didn't really limit me in terms of what I could do. And then in addition to that, while there were some shortcomings to changing over to Lua, I was able to mostly handle it. The biggest shortcomings were that some of the things require these kind of helper functions, like a from or an as object, in order to get the intended effect or the correct data format passed back. So there were some shortcomings. I'm looking at potentially optimizing those away and just writing more complex code behind the scenes to handle that situation. But for now, just to get things working, I didn't want to overcomplicate things. So I do have a simple scripting language. Everything is now written in Lua. I'm adding functions as I go, because the API yet is far from fully developed. But it's developed enough to do some basic stuff, move a sprite around, pop up a menu, show some text on the screen, that sort of thing. But there's a lot of functions I still need to expose, and a lot of functions that I need to write as well. So we're definitely far from complete, but I'm happy with the progress, and it's definitely come a long way from where it was when I first started. Maybe that's a good time to mention that this project's kind of been in development for about 2 years on and off. I put in probably about 3 to 6 months at the very beginning with a decent amount of motivation, a decent amount of commitment, probably about 10 hours a week, maybe even more, on some weeks, maybe 20 hours. So almost like a part-time job for those first few months. But then I started to just get a little bit tired, I also hit some creative roadblocks. So I just took a step back, kind of let the juices settle a bit, enjoyed this summer, and then kind of came back to it later in the fall, made a few updates, and then hit roadblocks again. The big roadblocks that I was stumbling on were lighting related. Every time it seemed like I was getting back to doing lighting, it seemed like I was having all these problems. The lighting, it just didn't seem to make sense. It was like there was lighting in the scene, but it wasn't doing what I wanted. It was just really weird. I was happy to first get lighting in the scene, and it wasn't flat anymore. But then the lighting was weird. So I took a really long break, like probably 8-10 months, where I'd maybe touch it every couple of months, try for a few hours, scratch my head in confusion, and walk away, because everything I was trying, it didn't seem to make a difference. I was doing vastly different techniques to get lighting to work, and it didn't seem like any of it was working well. And so I was really disappointed, and it just, without proper lighting, I didn't really want to continue. It felt like that was the thing I wanted to get out of the way next, and then I would be inspired to do other things. And it was a long roadblock. Like I said, 10 months or more at least to get over. But I revisited it in the fall recently, this year, and finally made some progress. I realized that part of the issue that I was facing was that inside of my function here, I have a rendering manager. And what was happening was I'd set up this shader program right here. And I had originally started with a combined model and a view matrix. So I had a projection matrix, a model view matrix, but not a model and a view matrix like I do now. And what that meant was that when I was applying lighting, what I didn't realize, because I was still learning it, was that I was applying it to the model view matrix, which was effectively after all the translations and everything. And so it was effectively applying lighting after it had moved everything into position for the camera to take the scene. And so everything was positioned in correctly in regards to the camera's positioning, because I have some billboarding and 3D objects, so I had to do some stuff to get those to work. But what was happening was that because it was being applied to the model and the view, the lighting was being applied to the final scene after everything was done. And it was more like I was shooting light into the finished picture than it was like I was lighting the actual scene that I was taking a picture of. And so it would be more like working in Photoshop instead of working in Blender. I had already rendered my 3D scene into a 2D image, and then I was trying to light it in Photoshop. And so while you could certainly do some things, like the old school bump maps and all that kind of stuff, it required that you would have those for every asset that you wanted to light. And you would, and it was like a really complex old school way of doing it that I didn't really want to go down. And it didn't make any sense. Why was it so difficult? I could see other people doing it. They didn't have bump maps. What were they doing differently? So I just kept going to different online GitHub repos that I could find. And there weren't many of them, sadly. There aren't many. And almost every GitHub repo I found was using the 3JS library. And that wasn't going to help me because I'm not using any, graphics library in my code. I'm just using the WebGL standard API. And that was the focus that I wanted to do. I wanted to understand what I was actually doing, not just use some library that potentially could, hamstring me later as well. Plus, I didn't want to change my paradigm of thinking to match the library. I wanted to code my engine to match the paradigm of thinking that I had in mind. So, trying to find a lot of examples with just native JavaScript, vanilla, WebGL was actually kind of difficult. There weren't probably less than a dozen ones that were within, the realm of my understanding and fit. Because I was also looking for similar things, right? I was looking for multiple lights in a 3D scene in some fashion that I understood, So I was looking at all these different GitHub repos, and I finally realized that the commonality between all the repos that it was working in, that I versus mine, was that they had 3 of these matrices. They had separated a model, view, and projection matrix. And so I did a little bit more reading. I kind of refactored my shader, which I have down here. And so after kind of refactoring everything, it suddenly started to work because, I guess it's Vertex. Because now, when I'm applying my lighting, I'm applying it to the model matrix. So I get to still move around all the objects and everything gets positioned pretty well. But when I'm lighting it up, I'm lighting up the actual 3D scene, like all the vertices in that 3D scene. I'm not lighting up the flattened vertices that I was getting previously, right? And then after I get the lighting done, I still do the flattening as normal, and apply it to the projection and all that. But I'm doing it in the shader instead of doing it essentially all in one before it gets fed in. So it gave me the ability to finally light up the objects physically in the scene, have light, have some depth and all that, some real 3D positioning. And I didn't just have to flatten the image anymore and try to light it up in Photoshop. So finally, after I figured that out, I split out the matrices. It worked. I was able to get multiple lights in the scene. I was able to give them depth and radius and all that, and light up different brightnesses and different colors and watch them actually blend in. And that, when I finally resolved that, was such a big win for me. I felt amazing. I got inspired again. I've started to go back essentially ever since I solved that light problem, because it was like 10, 12 months, who knows, without any real progress. Maybe a small refactor, a small thing here. But every time I touched it, it was just like, try to get lighting to work, and it didn't work. Finally, getting it to work. I've made a lot of progress since then. Since then is when I actually rewrote the scripting language. I did that after I fixed the lighting. So I got the lighting. I was inspired to go back and redo the scripting language. I was able to add in a new shader, a picker shader, which allows me now to actually pick objects on the screen and figure out what object is being selected, regardless of where it is drawn. As long as it's the actual object you're clicking, it's going to work. And that was really nice. I got to learn about how that works. Essentially, you draw a second shader, and I'll get into that probably in a future devlog in more detail. But you're essentially drawing one type of image before you render it to the screen, and then you're using that first image to kind of pick. And the way that you do it is you draw every object and every tile and everything in a different color. And so that way, when you select the object, you just have to know what color of the pixel on that image that you've selected is, and you know right away what the object is because you've got a one-to-one lookup. So then you go and you look it up. Then you perform, say, a selection, or you add in an action cue, or you bring up a menu, or whatever it is based on the selection. But you can then render that right away on that frame. You don't have to do like a second frame. You don't have to wait another round to render that, giving it that instantaneous feel that users expect. But additionally, it makes it actually quite simple and nice, because you know that you're rendering this simpler image. And after I'd kind of implemented that picker shader, it really opened my eyes to how multiple shaders work in conjunction. I've seen some implementations that they actually do the billboard in a completely separate shader. I'm doing mine in like this kind of combined shader, right? Like I've got these various functions and a couple conditions, and I'm thinking that I don't know how efficient it is to swap over shader programs, but if it's more efficient, I will pull this logic out and definitely make a separate billboarding shader, because I like the idea of the simplicity of actually having the billboarding shader all by itself, whereas right now you have to determine if you're passing in a billboard or if you're passing in a 3D object. And it just makes the shader more complex. It makes the shader program more complex. It makes the general code kind of messy. So, from a cleanliness perspective, it makes a lot of sense to have multiple shaders. But I also have to do some performance analysis, because I did notice a little bit of performance when I was doing the picker. Of course, there's additional logic that follows that picker option. But it wasn't a huge amount, but it was just slightly noticeable, so obviously you can't do this infinitely without some sort of negative performance impact. So I'm looking at improving the entire shader system, as well as adding in additional shaders. You can kind of see here on the side I've got a blur shader. That was from one of my roadblock projects while I was trying to get lighting to work from, I think, a year ago. I was trying to implement blurring and transitions and stuff, and I still haven't managed to get that. So I'm hoping to have a devlog coming up here that will chart some of the progress and actually have some live coding, maybe in real time as we solve it together. So that's essentially one of the things that I have lined up, is to add different kind of shaders. I also want to add like a skybox shader, and then add like a simple skyboxing system that's easy to configure and set up via packages. So again, you don't have to think about, oh, how do I set up a skybox using this engine? Instead, there's just a config file where you say skybox and point at the asset, and the skybox gets taken over. And then again, in the future, if this actually gets some community support and people are interested in using it, and it's not just me, then maybe there'll also be some need to add additional advanced functionality. But for now, I'm just focusing on, like I said, a tactical RPG to start, and then expanding out from there to a few other genres, and adding the various functionality and examples needed to kind of do that. Ultimately, I just want to release this open source for non-commercial purposes. There might be a commercial licensing agreement available, but for general public use, as long as you're not making money off of it, it's going to be free. Free to use, free. The player will always be free to download. But in terms of, packaging up your own games and then like selling them, I think that's going to have to come with a license. So I've got it licensed right now for non-commercial use. You can always look it up if you want. It's called Calliope Pixos. You can look up Pixospritz, so it might show up as well if Google deep indexes the files at all. But the goal is to make it open source so anyone can look at the code. And ideally, people will improve my code, help me clean it up, add new functions, all the fun stuff that comes from open source. Because I'm certainly not an expert in this. I've learned so much, though. It's incredible how much I've learned. The funny thing is, though, the best learning has definitely come from the roadblocks. Those quick wins early on didn't actually give me much understanding at all, to be honest, which is why I stumbled into those roadblocks. I had been reading simplistic examples. I had been reading examples that weren't fully applicable, hence my model view issue showing up. And it's those kinds of things that have been some of the biggest eye-openers for me, is just recognizing that you don't really know what you don't know until you've stumbled and hurt your toe, right? And that's kind of the way that I've approached this. But I feel that every time I do get over one of those roadblocks, I'm always thinking, like, how did I get over this? What did I learn? And it's been very educational. And for me, I like a good meaty problem. I like things that I can continue to untangle. And the WebGL, the 3D game programming, building an engine, it's got all of that. It's such a complex beast that there's always more for me to look at. And it's also a really good lesson in paring down your functionality. I don't know how many times I have thought of new features to add. I mean, even just having this conversation, I started thinking of new features. Dozens and dozens and dozens of features, new modules, you name it. I haven't even talked about the fact that I'm building an editor for this as well. So there's those modules. On top of that, there's modules to do the editing, to do all that I'm thinking about. So it's going to be a very big project. And one of the most important things when you're focused on big projects like this is to always keep it realistic and to always focus on the critical path. So one of the things that I've been really trying to do is, even though I had this really cool idea, don't just start trying to write it. Don't just open up a can of worms. because I already have enough tech debt as it is. I gotta add more functionality. I got some bugs I gotta sort out. I've got some things I want to just restructure and clean up. And if I just start adding more and more and more and more, just every idea comes and I just keep going like this, I'll never be able to loop it back. I'll never actually go forward. I'll just go sideways. So that's how I kind of think about this. I'm always saying, it's a nice idea, nice to have. If it's really future forward, I usually put it in like a Word document that I have online, in the cloud, where I jot down ideas. If it's something that's like, something that hits me, just before I'm going to bed, I'll put that idea down in, say, a journal I have. I'm not going to go and put that online right away. I'm just going to go to bed. But I'll write it down in a journal and maybe revisit it. At the same time, if I'm coding something, I like to leave myself little comments in the code where I can, little to-do notes, things like that you got to do. For example, like, I need to build an entire saving system, and I need to build like a general memory storage state system that can be used to, save your progress and load your progress from a previous save. So I'm in the process of doing that. But again, this is one of those side projects that we're in during the roadblock phase. So I have to go back and revisit them because I just didn't have the motivation to complete a lot of these, but I was started. But now I've opened up the door, right? So some of this stuff I might end up just going back and scrapping completely because it's not fully in use. And I might just redesign it if I don't like what I did. A lot of this is not fresh in my mind. I haven't really reviewed it probably in a year for some of this stuff. Like, let's see, what's the blame say? Yeah, 1 year, 3 months ago was when I wrote this. So yeah, so obviously I've been struggling with lighting for over a year and 3 months. So 15 months was at least how long ago I'd hit that roadblock, because that's when I started working on this kind of stuff. So it was a long time to get over that. I'm really happy I did. I guess that's all for this first episode in terms of, technical content, because there's a lot to go over, and I think I've already kind of touched on enough for this. But that's not the end of this episode. So to finish up the episode, I am going to give a little bit of a demonstration of what I have got working so far in Pixospritz. So without further ado, let us start up our game. So as you can see here, again, it's just a web browser. It's pretty rough, as you can see when it loads. I should say this style has not at all been my focus. It's one of my shortlisted items that I definitely want to get around to. It actually might be one of the items that I work on in the coming months here, because I think it's relatively low-hanging fruit that will make a big impact on presentation. Because even me, like, I've looked at this for so long, it doesn't really affect me too much, but it's ugly. Let's just be real. This is ugly. And there's also other things too. Like, I need to work on, styling, making sure size is dynamic. There's a lot of things that I've not worried about because I've been focusing on just trying to lay a foundation, and leave these for future optimizations and, wins in the future as well. But this is essentially the loading screen. Again, I plan on completely redoing this eventually and making it look nice. It's really basic right now, but effectively you can load your game file. If we go in here, let's find, where are we? So we want to go into our Spritz. So a Spritz is what I'm calling a game, a mini game for my engine. So the virtual game console itself is called Pixospritz, and it plays Spritzes. So you load a Spritz, and that's essentially your game. And the idea behind Spritz is it comes from sprite and z, and to me that means like motion or multiple, hackers to some degree. But it's essentially, that's what you're loading. So if you think of your game cartridge on your Game Boy, and And if you think of your, your CD that goes into your PlayStation, that's essentially what my Spritz is. It goes into Pixospritz. So this zip file is a Spritz. I should say also that, the Spritzes right now are just simple zip files. Everything is contained inside of a zip, but it has to have this structure. So it has to have a manifest file, has to have a variety of different folders, in this case maps, callbacks, audio. These can all be empty, but this is just the standard root structure that is expected to be inside of a Spritz. And as I said, I might restructure this, and I might add some future ones. But this is the structure as it stands. So I've got a Spritz here that I've been kind of working on. Again, this was just really basic. It's not the game that I'm planning on building. This is like the raw dev note Spritz. It's where things are just added in. It's like the debug mode, right? So I've got a bunch of different things enabled in here. But it's not necessarily for fun, right? So we got like as you saw, basic menu system there that I kind of opened and closed. We've got our main character sprite. Hold on, let me just refresh this. I don't know how fast this is gonna be, because I'm running it from dev and not a fresh build, so it's probably gonna be memory intensive, considering I'm also streaming. So I apologize, but this is effectively what I'm working on right now. So it's you got your simple tile-based world. Everything here is just a simple tile, right? So if you think about where are we? This whole block, right, is say a tile. That's a tile. That's a tile. These would be tiles, whether they're multiple stories or they're flat, like the floor, right? And so you end up with a bunch of tile set geometry, and then you essentially just lay it out. So you're like, okay, I want a corner two-piece wall here. I want, side wall here. I want floor here, and you just kind of lay out the tiles and the height and all that. So that's kind of how the mapping system is. Like I said, there are some constraints to that, obviously, because everything's kind of done on like this coordinated grid system. As you can see, it's not the smoothest right now. Again, the streaming certainly isn't helping. It's fighting that. Because it looks like streaming is taking up about a quarter of my CPU right now. And then I've also got other things, in the background. So it's usually a little bit faster. And it would definitely be faster in a compile on like an actual, user experience, because they wouldn't be running debug mode like me. But that's kind of the idea. You can kind of see some of the selection picker that I was talking about earlier applied there with the tiles that I've selected. But I've also applied it to, the objects. So you can, select sprites, you can select 3D objects, you can select, decors and sprites on the wall. All of these items can be kind of picked. And obviously, by itself, there's no real value to that. But with it, I can now trigger a bunch of things, right? So on selection, I can trigger a menu. On selection, I can trigger a move. On selection, I can trigger an attack, etc., etc., etc. So having the ability to actually select objects, know what they are, where they are in the world, that sort of thing. For example, interactions. So just opening a door on click. I can do things like that. And so there's a number of different things that I can do with that mechanism. So adding the mechanism in for me was a nice milestone, because it now starts allowing me to come up with different kind of gameplay ideas, right? Now I can actually start building in the tactical selection, the tactical RPGs, right? This game engine has some really bad pathfinding right now. It's truly a nightmare. But it can do simple things like this, but but as you can see, I've got some issues there. Like, it doesn't seem to always move far enough. It seems to be off by 1, and I've got some other issues too, where my input needs to be debounced a little bit better, and I need to just smoothen everything up. I need to just make everything a little bit more responsive and fast. I've added in a few too many delays that are, as you can see, causing this kind of slower motion. And I also need to add in some just like real-time checks and balances. But one of the things that I want to highlight in this scene is that you can see there's a number of different point lights in just various spots around the level. And there's like this green light that follows the main character. And these were so hard to add, right? Like, these are the multiple point lights that I'm talking about. I obviously haven't tried to place them in any specific real pattern here. But I just was happy to see them. I've got point lighting. It can highlight certain areas. It can, affect things in different directions. Like, this is one of the things that I really liked, and why it inspired me to do so much more. Because once you add lighting, I mean, it just makes everything look better. Because now these corners look dark. The lava looks bright. This corner kind of seems dingy, but it's not necessarily as dark as, the far end. These are all things that add atmosphere and make a game just pop. Obviously I haven't, put in the effort to make it precise or anything to make it pop yet, but these are the foundational elements, right? Like, I can add a light near the fire, for example, and actually give it a warm reddish glow that emanates out from that area, giving it a little bit more vibrancy, right? These are the things that I'm thinking about. The other thing that I'm thinking about is, like, when you talk to somebody, how do you interact with them, right? What happens when you interact? What's a menu look like? If I'm talking to somebody, like, because I do have some ideas in the future of potentially doing some sort of like networked multiplayer, very simple networked multiplayer. But I was thinking, like, you need some sort of chat system, right? So probably have a chat log running down the side. But the other thing I was playing around with just for now was, like, can I change the message above my head? Hello, how are you, right? And let me see. Let's try this again. Okay, apparently I have a bug there. It's been a while since I've actually written anything with this. But yeah, okay, so there is a bug. There's supposed to be a speech bubble that pops up over their head and kind of says the message. I guess that broke at some point, so possibly when I was working with all the shaders to add lighting, I might have broken the speech bubbles, or I might have actually disabled them too. I'm not sure. So I apologize for that. I was expecting a speech bubble. But as you can see with the UI that kind of popped up there is some basic UI in the sense that, like, you do end up getting a little profile photo. You have the text. If it's long text, it will scroll. Not very well, but it will. But yeah, like, I did put a little bit of effort into getting at least a basic UI in there. At the same time, for the menus, they do happen to have, like, awareness, again, for selection. So you can select the buttons and stuff. You can also nest menus. But, yeah, this is kind of just, like, the basic progress. One final thing I do want to mention, and is that a lot of this was inspired by original retro games, but it was also inspired by a number of GitHub projects. For example, this actual layout here with the lava and the tiles and all that, I got from this WebGL project online, this open source project. And if you go in deep in the Git logs, you'll see it referenced there. But that's kind of where I got this original layout design for this room, was from that project. And I kind of used it as a demo. I'm not going to actually implement it in anything, but for the purposes of this demo, I liked it because it gave me it gave me some nice geometry. One, everything is symmetrical. But you also got some interesting layers here. So you got a couple of different heights. You got, you know, these platforms are at one height. The walkway is at another height. The stairs go up, and so you have a partial half height in there as you're walking. Then you've got the lava that's even lower. And I liked that example because it also, I modified this texture map. But I essentially based it off of the texture map that that he had in his project. It's essentially just not a copy, but a variation of the same ideas, right? So like the same kind of designs and stuff, like were applied, the same geometry. But I really liked that idea, so I kind of like took it and kind of ran with it, implemented it into this project, because this was one of the better examples I found that kind of helped me lay the foundation. But again, that was quite a while back. That was like, I would say, probably at the beginning of this project, when I first kind of stumbled on that. I haven't been able to find it since, to be honest. I don't know what the name of it was or anything. I have it in my Git logs in there. But like off the top of my head, or how I found it, I just don't remember. But it was on GitHub. It was an open source project at the time. I think MIT licensed, and yeah, no, it was a great inspiration because it gave me a lot of groundwork to start with, and then kind of helped me figure out some of that initial rendering. You know, obviously it didn't include any of the multiple lighting or any of that stuff. It didn't include, you know, the camera rotations, the selection picker, or anything. But it showed me how to make a tiled map in 3D like this with, you know, textures and all that. And so I was very thankful for that. So I just want to give a shout out. But yeah, this is kind of what I'm working towards. I'm hoping to build these kind of little maps. Obviously, as you can see, you can link the worlds up. You can go from one room to another. You can have multiple rooms. I haven't seen how big of a map I can make before there's performance issues one time on a screen. But there's also other things that I'm not currently doing, like occlusion culling. So if it gets to a point where I start having larger maps than, say, things like this, and there's a lot more map off screen, then I'm definitely going to be looking into some of those techniques, because it seems like I kind of need them in order to do what I want to do. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have for this podcast for now. I guess stay tuned. Follow up in the next DevLog. I'll try and do some actual live coding, hopefully. I'm just a little bit tired today, getting set up for the stream and getting everything kind of lined up. There's a lot of learning in all things that we do, right? You know, whether it's setting up a podcast, learning how to do 3D programming, learning how to ride a bike, you name it, right? There's always stuff. But appreciate anyone who checks this video out. Appreciate anyone who does, to please, you know, like, subscribe, because it will help get the video out to more people. And ultimately, once I'm finished this development, I do want people to see the project, and I do want people to play around with it, and ideally to make their own spritzes. I'm going to eventually have like a website set up to download and get started with tutorials and all that. But as you can see, that's a little ways away. We still gotta finish the development, still gotta get some proper working examples developed, and shore up some of these performance and technical glitches. Anyways, thanks guys. I will go back to finish this off, but yeah, appreciate everyone checking in, appreciate your time, and stay tuned. Peace out.